All right. So, good morning. This is Wolfgang Krosky, CEO of the Pittsburgh Chamber of Commerce, and this is continuation of our series where we are interviewing candidates that are running for office here in Contra Costa County. Last week, we were able to hear from both candidates for district attorney, and we also heard from Mr. Terrio, who is running for sheriff. Today, we have the opportunity of hearing from Sheriff Livingston, who is running for re-election. And one thing that's important to note, I don't think we can stress this enough, but the election on June 7th for sheriff and district attorney, that is it. So if you're waiting to see the results to then decide what you're going to do in November, you are going to be seriously disappointed because it is all going to be decided in June. So it is a majority win. So please make sure that you get out and vote, regardless of who you want to vote for. Just please do vote and know that the election for sheriff and for district attorney, that decision is going to be dealt with in June. It's not going to be something that you can address in November. So don't know what you've heard, but that's what you need to know is June 7th is election day. So with that, we want to go ahead and turn it over to Sheriff Livingston, give an opportunity to go ahead and introduce himself and tell us a little bit about how he got to the point of being the current sheriff of Contra Costa County, and then we'll go with some questions from there. So Sheriff, turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for having me today. I've got quite a bit of experience in law enforcement, over 30 years, actually. Started my career down in Fremont and promoted through the ranks of sergeant, lieutenant, captain, and then was recruited to apply to the city of Pleasant Hill, where I later became police chief in 2002. I served there for 3 years as chief of police. I worked very closely with the chamber, of course, as a matter of fact. And then also was recruited over to Concord Police Department, where I was selected as their chief of police and served there for 5 years. Then our former sheriff, Sheriff Root, decided that he would retire. And it's at that time that I decided to run for sheriff in 2010, and I was obviously elected and sworn in the first part of January 2011. So I've got almost 12 years as your sheriff in Contra Costa County. I've been the past president of the California State Sheriff's Association. I've been on the California Police Chiefs Board of Directors. Our organization works closely with state and local leaders. I think one of my hallmarks is that I put politics last. It's public safety above politics. So I can work with Democrats, Republicans, independents with one goal in mind, and that's to try and make Contra Costa as safe as it possibly can be. So we've accomplished a lot in the sheriff's office over the last few years. There's much more work to do, and obviously look forward to an opportunity to sharing some of those thoughts in the future. But in short, I think experience is critically important, especially now during these unsure times that we're in, and I think I have that experience.
Awesome. So with the sheriff's office, a lot of people don't really know exactly, well, what does the sheriff do? They may interact with the sheriff or see the sheriff at, some of our unincorporated areas of the county or, smaller cities that contract with the sheriff's office for law enforcement. But what all does the sheriff do and the sheriff department? What do they do for the county?
So we're an organization of over 1,000 employees, and we have two primary functions. The first, obviously, is to provide immediate patrol services to our 180,000 unincorporated residents. We also have contract cities in Danville, in Lafayette, and Orinda. That is to say that we provide the policing services there. The uniforms actually say Danville or Lafayette, but they're all sheriff's deputies and sheriff's supervisors. And then we run custody operations. So all the jails in the county, if a court remands someone into custody, that person becomes our responsibility until their case is adjudicated in the courts. Or if they're sentenced to county jail, which happens more and more now, then we care for them, provide transition services during their time in custody so that they can hopefully come out of custody rehabilitated, and we can kind of start to impact that recidivism rate. But we do much more. Obviously, I'm the elected coroner as well. So we have coroner responsibilities, respectfully maintaining and collecting the remains of those that have passed throughout the county. Very challenging job, by the way, for the deputies. We also do court security. So all the bailiffs that you see and the security deputies at our courts are all done by the sheriff's office. We have an air operations unit. We have a marine patrol, which is particularly relevant for kind of the East County area out in Pittsburgh and Antioch, and of course out to Discovery Bay. Civil unit that does a lot of the civil enforcement of court orders. So it's a very large organization with a lot going on. And any success I've had as sheriff has really been to the great working men and women who go to work every day and have been during COVID, especially, just doing a fantastic job. So we cover a lot of area.
To dig into that a little bit further, I know I was reading last week about one of the county supervisors, Mr. Goya, that was saying that the county should, your sheriff one way or another, do away with contracts for service at some of the cities. What's your take on that, and what are your thoughts on if that were to happen?
I don't think that's going to happen. I think Supervisor Joya is expressing a concern about liability costs. Our contract cities already pay liability insurance now as part of their contract. And in fact, we've had very low exposure rates in all of our contracts. Most recently, of course, we've had a couple of high-profile shooting cases that have caused the county council to determine that they wanted to settle those cases. And so there's been some payouts there. But Supervisor Joya doesn't have any contract cities in his district. So I think the other supervisors would probably disagree with that. And I've already heard from most of the contracts that they're very, happy with our service. And if there has to be an adjustment in the cost for liability coverage, obviously we should look at that. And I'm always willing to look at new opportunities or changes, course corrections that we have to make. But I do think the Supervisor Joya is probably alone in that view at the moment, and we'll work with him coming up to see what other information he wants.
Awesome. So as a chamber, obviously we're an organization focused on businesses, and wanted to know exactly how you see the sheriff department working with the business community, and then specifically what are things that you as sheriff have done to help not just build relationships, but to help businesses in Contra Costa County.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, when I was the police chief in both Pleasant Hill and Concord, I worked very closely with the Chamber of Commerce. And I think any successful leader will do that with the executive director or with the board members, so that we're all on the same page about what crime trends are occurring, what issues are happening within that particular jurisdiction. It's a little bit different for our unincorporated areas that may or may not have a formal chamber, of course, but for cities, it's very important. And the main thing we can do is prevent crime if at all possible, but also support our local partners. And one good example actually is in Walnut Creek, where we had those rash of burglaries and robberies. At our cost, we sent deputy sheriffs during the busy holiday season in Walnut Creek to provide and augment Walnut Creek's patrols so that we could deter any future theft in those areas, and also make shoppers and business owners more comfortable that they have adequate patrols. So that's the main thing. The second thing we've done just recently, actually, we've been fighting for years to add staffing to our patrol function. And the Board of Supervisors, you may have seen on Tuesday last week, authorized funding for a total of 30 new deputy sheriffs that will go right to patrol. And when you have more deputies on patrol in the unincorporated areas, it allows us to respond much more quickly, to be more proactive around business issues or areas where we're seeing a spike in crime. And I'm very excited that the board supported me. This is not a defund the sheriff in any way. It's just the opposite. It's acknowledging that we need to be rightly staffed to provide services, not just for all the community members, but for the businesses as well.
Now, what do you see in the coming years, some of the challenges that businesses are going to be facing, and how the Department of the Sheriff can help with that?
Well, one is increases in crimes that are fraudulent, that are technology-based. And we also need a partnership in a DA's office that will actually charge people that have been apprehended. We arrest a lot of people for theft and property crimes. The issue now is, will the DA follow through and hold those people accountable? And if that doesn't happen, it makes it very difficult for us to be effective in our job. So we're always working with the DA, the chiefs and I and the district attorney and our federal partners. We meet every month to discuss crime trends, what we're seeing as far as theft and fraud cases, where we need to put our resources. So that's going on all the time. And then also the dialogue with business owners. Let me know, or let my staff know, or representatives, if there's issues, if there's concerns, if there's spikes in crime, so that we can be responsive. Because now I think with the adequate staffing that the board has given me, significant funding to increase those patrols, we're going to be in a good position to be even more responsive than we have been in the past.
So if it's, to sum that up, it's fair to say that law enforcement is apprehending. It's just they're not being prosecuted by the DA's office.
Well, I won't say
not blanket statement, but
yeah,
that's
I think
an area that could see an improvement.
I think so, and you may have already heard that from our district attorney candidates. And District Attorney Becton famously said that if people that were looting in downtown Walnut Creek can tell the prosecutor that they needed the stuff that they stole, well, then she won't charge them. And that's obviously, I disagree with that 100%, because we do need a partner. And when someone's remanded into custody, there's many triggers that occur. One is that we get that person into rehabilitation or rehab if they have substance abuse problems. We can work with their parole or probation officers to, again, try and reduce that cycle of people that get in custody, out, then they go steal catalytic converters, and then they're right back in custody. We've got to break that cycle.
Awesome. So one opportunity I gave District Attorney Becton, I'll give you as well, is when you're running for reelection, there's a lot of myths out there about why this person should not be reelected. And I think one of the topics out there goes around the policy of cite and release, and why we have that. Is it true nobody is being brought to the jail, et cetera? So just give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about the sheriff's policy of cite and release, and why we have it, where it's going, et cetera.
Yeah. So in reality, very few misdemeanants are remanded into custody in Contra Costa County. It's not that we're not making the arrests. We're not doing any more cite releases than we ordinarily would. But if they're arrested, say, by a Concord police officer for a burglary, if they're remanded into custody, typically they'll be out of custody because the DA may decide not to charge or want more time to investigate the case or what have you. So that person, in some cases, is back on the street before the officers finish writing the report. I'm sure you've heard that phrase. But the reality now about at least Contra Costa is that it's very rare to have misdemeanants, unless it's a repeat misdemeanor, domestic violence, something like that, remanded into custody. So we have very serious and violent offenders that are my responsibility as sheriff, remember, until that case is disposed of. For example, last week I was looking at our numbers. We have 172, I believe it's 172 detainees facing murder charges right now in Contra Costa County. An equal number facing sexual assault charges or assault charges. So when a judge remands someone of that nature, a felon, potential felon case to me, obviously we hold that person, there's no release at all. But if it's a misdemeanor and the DA elects not to file charges right away, then they're typically released. But there's a lot of people in custody, and I don't think people really realize sometimes just how many serious and violent felons we have in our responsibility here in Contra Costa. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality of the times, and they are my responsibility until their case is either dismissed or they're found guilty or they're found innocent or they take a plea deal, which is about 95% of the cases. So during that whole pendency of the case, they're actually in county jail. Once they're sentenced to state prison, then we would send them off to state prison. But it's a big operation running 3 different jail facilities in Contra Costa County.
I bet. And I think the myth, at least from the business community side, is, somebody, steals something from the store, breaks a window, does some type of crime against the business. They call police come and see the person, either taken away or, however it goes down. And then later that day or the next day or two, the person's back and it's like, well, what the heck? Why nothing's being done? Because I think, people don't understand all of the options and all the parts and, Prop 47 and all the pieces that go into it. So
Right.
I think that's why people feel that, well, I guess what's the point of reporting crime? They're just going to be back at my place tomorrow.
And can I just speak to that? I've
Yes.
heard that from business owners in particular about how they just don't bother even calling now. Someone can come into, say, a retail sales establishment and take items, leave the store in part because of that new higher cap under Prop 47, and they decide for whatever reason not to even call it in. We certainly don't want that in law enforcement, and certainly I don't as sheriff, because that person that may have just done that theft may be wanted for other crimes or may have committed other thefts that would allow us to hold that person in custody. So merchants should always call when they have these type of events. But I definitely understand, and I sense the frustration from one end of the county to the other from folks that are just trying to run a good business, and it's very challenging.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you said all that, because it is. I think the average resident doesn't understand the process per se and all the parts. They just see that crime was taken out against me on my business, and then the next day I see that same person. They don't realize, all the moving parts. So the other myth that we hear, and this one's not only tied to the business community. I've seen it around others. It's around CCWs. Again, people not understanding what you can and can't do when you're at your place of business, and when you leave your place of business, they just think, well, I would like to have a CCW and I got to go to the sheriff, and the sheriff, quote unquote, only gives it to the elite. So,
right. So
speak to that myth.
Sure, that's an accusation my opponent is making. It's kind of all the politics around this. It's absolute nonsense. If you look at most of the concealed weapons permits I've issued, I have no idea who the person is personally, no idea about their background. I rely on the process that we have set up that actually involves an administrative lieutenant doing the interviews, doing the backgrounds, and then that person makes a recommendation to me about whether we should issue a concealed carry permit or not. And it's not my choice to say that someone has to prove good cause for issuance of the permit. It's actually state law. And sometimes people will come in and say, well, it's my right, darn it, I should be able to get a concealed weapons permit. And I understand that feeling, but the law typically up and down the state has required more than that. But if people are interested in a concealed carry permit, they should apply. Now, it doesn't have to just be the sheriff, it can be a chief of police as well. But to suggest that it's friends of mine or people that are in a sheriff's posse or this, that, the numbers just don't bear that out. And the reality is, all of those numbers are public documents, they're public records. So I just think that's really an unfortunate accusation. He's trying to get some political clout, frankly, by a small group who really wants to advance that CCW issuance policy more broadly. But we actually issue quite a few that come through applicants, as I said before, most of whom I don't know personally.
And correct me if I'm wrong, isn't proper protocol that you apply first through your local police department, and then if not accepted there, then you would go to the sheriff? Is that
It's
kind
not
of the proper
required.
protocol? Okay.
It's not required in the law for that, but that's typically what chiefs would like to do. Some chiefs have said that they just are not interested in issuing concealed weapons permits, so they then by default come to the sheriff of the county for issuance. But that's not required. I don't require an applicant to say that they did not receive it from their local chief. It just doesn't work that way.
Okay. And then another topic in regards to the business community, mostly out here in East Contra Costa County communities like Bay Point and Discovery Bay, speaking with businesses, feeling that there aren't enough deputies to kind of cover the area. I know you talked a little bit about you're going to have receiving increased funding for patrols. Would that cover areas like Bay Point and Discovery Bay, or what are your thoughts on helping those communities?
Yeah, we're adding 5 posts across the county, and each post requires 5 deputy sheriffs to staff it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So absolutely having more resources in all those areas. whether it's out in El Sobrante or whether it's Discovery Bay or Byron, having those new deputies finally authorized will make a significant impact. People will see sheriff's patrols and deputies more frequently. It's like the body worn cameras. I've been asking for funding for 5 years for body worn cameras. And the board finally this year agreed to use some of the Measure X funding so that I can get those body worn cameras, which for an agency our size is over $1 million a year to operate that program. So that's an example of where, fortunately, the board has been supportive of me as the sheriff, and we've increased patrols, and now we'll have even better transparency.
Okay, great. So you're obviously running for re-election. You do have an opponent, which means there are people in the county that feel that you're not meeting the needs that they have, or you're not doing a good job. So what would you say to those individuals or those that are on the fence and really haven't made a decision yet on why you are the best candidate to be sheriff for Contra Costa County?
Well, it comes down kind of what I opened with, experience. My opponent has not been promoted to even first line supervisor. He's a beat cop in Richmond. And I appreciate his service, but the Deputy Sheriff's Association, over 800 strong, has enthusiastically endorsed me because they know I'm an experienced leader. I've had to hire deputies. I've had to fire deputies. Many of the things deal with a $300 million budget, things that my opponent just has not had to do as a cop on the beat. I've been a sergeant. I've been a lieutenant. I've been a captain. I've been police chief in 2 cities. I've been sheriff for over a decade. So I think it's a little bit of just a political argument. Well, we need a new sheriff. Well, why is that? And why would it be you, a police officer from Richmond? Interestingly, he didn't put the city of Richmond on the ballot. When you get your ballots, you'll see he just puts police officer. Probably not wanting people to associate him with a very challenging city and at times a very violent city. But the reality is, I think I'm more experienced, work with all the leaders across the county, and I think a nonpartisan, no party preference. He's been really hammering kind of the far left Democrat support out there in Richmond. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in public safety and keeping Contra Costa families safe. And that's what I'll continue to do when we're reelected on June 7th.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you for your time. I know that you're busy and hitting the campaign trail and taking time to speak with us here at the Pittsburgh Chamber of Commerce and those in the business community out here in East Contra Costa County. Thank you for that. And just a reminder to everybody that June 7th is the election day. And with that, give you the opportunity for closing words.
Again, thank you. And thanks for working with my calendar to get this interview together. I hope the dialogue continues. I know Pittsburgh has its own police department, so things are a little bit different perhaps, but as sheriff, we touch every agency. I will work very collegial with all the police chiefs throughout the county. We work together well. If there's something that the chamber, in this case in Pittsburgh, would like to raise with me as sheriff, let's make sure that dialogue continues. I've always had a great working relationship with chambers wherever I've been, and that's not going to change. So I think I'm the experienced sheriff. I think I'm the right choice, and I thank you for your consideration on June 7th.